September 12, 1944. The dense Hürtgen Forest near the German-Belgian border. Major Wilhelm Steiner hunched over a worn wooden table in a damp concrete bunker, serving as the forward intelligence center for Wehrmacht Army Group B. Rain pattered against the small ventilation window, the only source of natural light in the cramped underground room. Across from him sat Captain Friedrich Mertz, their faces illuminated by a single hanging bulb that cast long shadows across the walls, covered with maps of the Western Front. Between them lay a collection of items that appeared unremarkable at first glance: captured American field manuals, training documents, and maintenance records for something called the U.S. Rifle, caliber 30 M1. The forms were ordinary military paperwork, their appearance giving no hint. They contained information that would reveal a devastating tactical advantage that had been silently killing German soldiers since the Normandy landings. Yet within these pages lay proof of a battlefield reality so profound that both officers had spent the previous 3 days verifying calculations, cross-referencing combat reports, and desperately searching for errors that would make their conclusions less catastrophic. Mertz's hand trembled slightly as he pushed a training document across the desk. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The document was a standard American infantry training manual with time-motion studies of rifle fire rates. Steiner studied the numbers in silence, his face growing pale as he absorbed their implications. The Americans weren't just outproducing Germany in tanks, planes, and ships. They had given every common infantryman a weapon that could deliver 3 times the firepower of the standard German carabiner 98k rifle. He looked up at Mertz, searching his colleague's face for some indication this was an error or exaggeration. Mertz's expression offered no comfort. He had already worked through the same calculations, reached the same conclusions, and spent 2 sleepless nights hoping he was wrong. "This cannot be accurate," Steiner said quietly, though his tone carried no conviction. He was not stating a belief, but expressing a desperate wish that reality might somehow be less terrible than the evidence suggested. Mertz pulled another document from the stack. "I thought the same. This is a field maintenance report for a single American regiment covering the fighting near Saint-Lô. They replaced 211 M1 rifles over a 2-week period." He paused, letting the numbers settle. "I compared this to our own rifle replacement rates. A German regiment of equivalent size might replace 60 to 80 Kar98k rifles in similar combat conditions." The 2 men had spent days engaged in exactly this kind of comparison, cross-referencing captured American documents with German field reports, prisoner interrogations with combat data, damage assessments with medical reports. Every source confirmed the same impossible truth. American infantry weren't just better supplied than their German counterparts. Each individual American soldier carried a weapon that made him the equivalent of 3 German riflemen in terms of raw firepower. This wasn't a matter of courage, tactical brilliance, or ideological fervor. It was simple mechanics and mathematics, a semi-automatic rifle against a bolt-action one. And that difference was killing German soldiers at rates that no amount of training or experience could overcome. The journey to this moment of terrible clarity had begun weeks earlier, with puzzling casualty reports from the Normandy front. German units consistently reported higher than expected casualties from encounters with American infantry, even when Germans held superior defensive positions. Initial assessments blamed this on artillery support or air superiority, but detailed analysis of after-action reports suggested something else was happening at the squad level. German commanders with years of combat experience on the Eastern Front found their units suffering casualties at rates that defied explanation. Veteran squads that had survived years of brutal fighting against Soviet forces were being decimated in relatively brief encounters with American infantry. The pattern was consistent and disturbing. German units were taking casualties at nearly 3 times the rate they inflicted on similarly positioned American units in basic infantry engagements. The German intelligence services had tracked American weapons development since before the war, compiling reports on production capabilities, design specifications, and field performance. but they had consistently catastrophically underestimated the tactical impact of putting a semi-automatic rifle in the hands of every infantryman. This wasn't mere incompetence. The assumptions built into German tactical thinking, shaped by their own weapons development philosophy, made the widespread deployment of semi-automatic rifles seem impossible, even fantastical. Germany's own experience colored everything they believed about infantry combat. By 1944, the Reich had developed excellent semi-automatic and fully automatic weapons. The Gewehr 43 semi-automatic rifle and the revolutionary Sturmgewehr 44 assault rifle were superior designs in many respects, but these remained specialty weapons, issued in limited numbers to elite units. The backbone of German infantry remained the Kar98k, a bolt-action rifle that had changed little in basic operation since the 1892. The fundamental German miscalculation began before the first shot was fired. In 1941, American ordnance officers had finalized production plans for the M1 Garand, declaring it would become the standard infantry rifle for all U.S. Army soldiers. Reports of this standardization were transmitted to Berlin through the Lottes-Local, multiple intelligence channels. When presented to Hitler and his advisors, the German leadership's response was dismissive, even contemptuous. The production figures were obviously exaggerated, they concluded, and even if true, American soldiers, mostly civilians hastily trained, could never effectively utilize such a sophisticated weapon. The assessment seemed reasonable based on Germany's own experience. In German service, semi-automatic rifles were complex weapons that required additional training and careful maintenance. They were more expensive to produce, more prone to mechanical failure in adverse conditions, and consumed ammunition at rates that would strain already limited supply lines. The logistical burden of supplying ammunition for widespread semi-automatic fire seemed prohibitive. How could the Americans possibly equip their rapidly expanding army with such weapons? It violated every principle of mass mobilization that German experience had established. Building such sophisticated rifles required skilled labor and precision machinery. Training soldiers to use them effectively demanded months of instruction. Maintaining them in field conditions required experienced armorers and abundant spare parts. The American plan seemed like the fantasy of overconfident industrialists rather than achievable reality. Field Marshal Keitel, chief of the High Command of the Wehrmacht, reportedly scoffed when he heard about American production goals. While the exact quote is disputed by historians, multiple sources cite Keitel stating that Americans can produce refrigerators and automobiles, but precision weapons require a tradition of craftsmanship they simply do not possess. Whether the exact quote is accurate, the sentiment it captured was certainly real. German leadership genuinely believed American industrial methods were unsuited for manufacturing precision weapons in mass quantities. This assessment seemed supported by observable facts. America excelled at producing consumer goods, automobiles, and household appliances using assembly line methods. But military rifles required different expertise, different quality controls, different traditions. German rifle production had been preparing for war since 1933. Master gunsmiths oversaw production of finely crafted weapons. How could American assembly lines possibly match German weapon quality and reliability? The Germans failed to understand something fundamental about American industrial potential that would prove decisive on the battlefield. The American semi-automatic rifle program had begun in earnest after World War I, when the U.S. military recognized the limitations of bolt-action rifles. After years of development, John Garand, a Canadian-born engineer working at Springfield Armory, created a design that could be mass-produced using methods similar to automotive manufacturing. What looked like a disadvantage to German observers, America's focus on mass production, became the key advantage in arming millions of soldiers with sophisticated weapons. When America ramped up M1 production, they weren't asking master gunsmiths to work faster. They were asking factories to apply assembly line methods to rifle production, breaking down the manufacturing process into simple, repeatable steps that could be performed by workers with minimal specialized training. Germany, by contrast, remained committed to traditional rifle-making methods. By 1944, German industry was producing remarkably advanced weapons like the Sturmgewehr 44, the world's first true assault rifle, but in quantities too small to affect the overall balance of infantry combat. The fundamental difference in production philosophy, American mass production versus German craftsmanship, meant that America could equip millions of soldiers with semi-automatic rifles, while Germany struggled to produce even limited numbers of similar weapons. Major Steiner came from Prussia's traditional military aristocracy. His family had served Germany for generations, and he embodied the professional officer class, methodical, detail-oriented, committed to objective analysis. His organization collected information from multiple sources, including frontline combat reports, systematic interrogation of captured prisoners, and documents captured during combat operations. Throughout the first months after D-Day, the intelligence picture reaching Berlin remained confusing and contradictory. Reports of American combat effectiveness varied wildly depending on the units engaged. Some indicated extraordinary firepower from ordinary infantry units, while others suggested American soldiers were hesitant and ineffective despite their equipment advantages. The German High Command chose to believe the more comforting assessments, the ones that aligned with their preconceptions about American inferiority in close combat. This selective acceptance of intelligence was not unique to the Germans. All military organizations tend to favor information confirming existing beliefs over data, challenging core assumptions. But in Germany's case, the cost of this cognitive bias would prove catastrophic, as divisions that had survived years on the Eastern Front were chewed up by American infantry firepower within weeks. After all, Germany was still winning tactical victories in 1944. German forces remained highly effective at small unit combat. German infantry tactics, developed through years of combat experience, were superior to American methods in many respects. The Wehrmacht had conquered Poland, France, the Balkans, and much of the Soviet Union. German soldiers were clearly superior to their opponents in training, tactics, and fighting spirit. So why should German leadership fear American infantrymen, most of whom had never seen combat before 1944, whose tactical doctrine was derivative of German innovations, whose officers lacked the experience of German commanders? This comfortable certainty began developing cracks after the breakout from Normandy, when American forces demonstrated unexpected combat effectiveness in situations where artillery and air support were limited. German commanders reported American infantry advancing through prepared defenses at rates that should have been impossible given the assumed balance of combat power. Generaloberst Hans von Salmuth, commanding the German 15th Army, wrote in his August 1944 report, "American infantry attacks with a volume of fire that cannot be explained by their numbers alone. Even small units can deliver suppressive fire equivalent to much larger German formations. This fire superiority negates our tactical advantages and makes traditional defensive positions untenable unless reinforced beyond normal doctrinal requirements." These reports were noted, filed, and largely ignored by the High Command in Berlin. Von Salmuth was known for pessimism, for always requesting more resources, for emphasizing difficulties over opportunities. His complaints were dismissed as the usual general's grumbling, the predictable tendency of field commanders to exaggerate enemy strength and minimize their own capabilities. Hitler personally rejected such assessments, insisting that Germanic willpower and tactical superiority would overcome material advantages. The Führer's worldview could not accommodate the possibility that industrial production methods might matter more than Aryan fighting spirit. But the intelligence analysts could not so easily dismiss what they were seeing in the field reports. Throughout the summer of 1944, as the situation deteriorated on all fronts, the volume of concerning data increased exponentially. After the surrender of large German formations in northern France, German intelligence conducted systematic interrogation of thousands of captured German soldiers. The debriefing teams, operating from questionnaires developed by the intelligence services, sought to understand not just tactical details of the fighting but broader patterns of American combat effectiveness. The stories these prisoners told were remarkably consistent across rank, unit, and experience level. Every interrogated prisoner described the shocking volume of fire from American infantry, They spoke of being pinned down by what seemed like machine gun fire, only to discover later it came from ordinary riflemen. They described watching comrades fall one after another while cycling the bolts of their Kar98k rifles, unable to return effective fire against enemies who never seemed to stop shooting. Experienced soldiers who had survived years on the Eastern Front described American infantry firepower as more terrifying than Soviet human wave attacks. Medical officers reported unusual patterns in wound distribution. German casualties showed higher rates of multiple gunshot wounds than in any previous campaign, suggesting they were being hit multiple times before they could reach cover. Some accounts seemed so extreme that interrogators initially suspected exaggeration or Allied psychological warfare, but the consistency across hundreds of independent interrogations made dismissal impossible. Officers and enlisted men, paratroopers and grenadiers, veterans and replacements, all told the same stories of overwhelming American rifle fire. More significantly, these accounts matched what other German forces were experiencing across the Western Front. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. These prisoner accounts, while concerning, could theoretically be dismissed as subjective impressions exaggerated by defeated soldiers trying to explain their failure. But then the captured documents began arriving in Berlin in greater numbers, and these could not be dismissed so easily. Unlike prisoner accounts, training manuals and maintenance reports were clinical, bureaucratic, undeniable. They were not meant to impress or intimidate. They were simply the routine paperwork of American military logistics, the mundane forms that tracked weapons through the military distribution system. And the numbers they contained were apocalyptic for German infantry tactics. One particular document proved especially illuminating, a time motion study from American infantry training. The report, stamped and signed by multiple officers, compared the practical fire rates of various infantry weapons under combat conditions. The study showed that an average soldier with a Garand could fire 40 to 50 aimed rounds in a minute during simulated combat conditions. A similar soldier with a bolt-action Springfield 1903 comparable to the German Kar98k could manage only 15 to 20 rounds in the same period. The M1's rate of fire was nearly 3 times that of a bolt-action rifle. Not in theory, not in perfect conditions, but in the hands of average soldiers under stress. Major Steiner compared these figures to German capabilities. A well-trained German infantryman with a Kar98k could fire perhaps 15 aimed shots per minute under combat conditions, and that was considering ideal circumstances with an experienced soldier. Many Wehrmacht infantrymen by 1944 were hastily trained replacements or elderly Volkssturm who would struggle to maintain even 10 rounds per minute in actual combat. The implications were staggering. An American squad of 12 men, all armed with Garands, could generate the same volume of fire as a German platoon of 36 men with Kar98ks. In defensive positions, this firepower disparity meant American units could hold ground against much larger German formations. In the attack, it allowed American infantry to maintain suppressive fire while maneuvering in ways German units simply could not match. The manual detailed another critical advantage. American soldiers could reload their Garands with 8-round en-bloc clips in roughly 3 seconds, while reloading a Kar98k required inserting 5 individual rounds, taking 15 to 20 seconds for a skilled operator. In close combat, this reloading difference often meant the difference between life and death. More disturbing still were the maintenance records. They showed that despite its mechanical complexity, the M1 Garand was remarkably reliable in field conditions. Mean rounds between failures were logged at over 3,000, comparable to the much simpler Kar98k. American production quality and materials science had created a weapon that combined the reliability of simpler designs with the firepower of more advanced ones. Captain Mertz approached these documents with the methodical precision that had made him one of Germany's most respected junior intelligence officers. He was from a family with a long tradition of military service, but he was also a university-educated analyst, trained to evaluate evidence objectively, regardless of personal preferences. The captured American documents represented hard data that could be quantified, compared, and analyzed. He began calculating systematically. If one American infantry squad could generate firepower equivalent to a German platoon, and the Americans had deployed millions of such soldiers across Europe, then the total combat effectiveness of American infantry exceeded anything Germany had anticipated. Mertz requested technical analysis of the M1 Garand from weapons experts, asking them to evaluate whether the reported performance figures were theoretically possible. The response confirmed the impossible. American factories were indeed mass-producing a weapon that combined qualities the German arms industry had considered mutually exclusive: reliability, firepower, and ease of mass production. Instead of requiring master gunsmiths working with precision tools, the M1 was designed from the beginning for assembly line production. Parts were interchangeable, not just between rifles from the same factory, but between rifles from any American manufacturing facility. Instead of hand-fitted components requiring skilled adjustment, the M1 used innovative design solutions that allowed for greater manufacturing tolerances while maintaining reliability. The gas operating system was robust enough to function in mud, snow, and dust conditions that would cripple more delicate designs. The en-bloc clip loading system, initially seen as a liability by German analysts, proved to be faster in combat conditions than any magazine system Germany had developed. The results were staggering. By 1944, Springfield Armory and Winchester had produced over 5 million M1 rifles, more than the total number of Kar98ks Germany had manufactured since 1935. In practical terms, this meant every American infantryman, from the greenest replacement to the most seasoned veteran, carried the same high-performance rifle, while most German infantry still used a design fundamentally unchanged since before World War I. Captain Mertz pulled another document from the stack, a medical study of combat wounds from both sides of the conflict. American Medical Corps had conducted detailed analysis of wound patterns, comparing injuries inflicted by different weapons. The study showed that German soldiers wounded by American rifle fire were far more likely to have multiple gunshot wounds than Americans hit by German rifle fire. The medical officers attributed this directly to the different rates of fire. An American soldier could put 3 to 4 rounds into a target in the time it took a German rifleman to chamber a second shot. This wasn't just a matter of statistics. It translated directly to combat effectiveness. German tactical doctrine had evolved over decades of warfare to work around the limitations of bolt-action rifles. Squad machine guns provided the bulk of firepower, while riflemen maneuvered and secured terrain. American infantry tactics had evolved differently, with each rifleman capable of delivering substantial firepower, allowing for more flexible small unit operations. General Otto Lasch, commanding German forces in East Prussia, had written in his July 1944 assessment, "American infantry does not rely on supporting weapons to the extent we expected. Their basic riflemen can generate enough fire to fix our positions without machine gun support. This fundamentally changes the tactical equation we have operated under for decades." This revelation ran counter to everything German officers had been taught about infantry combat. The machine gun had dominated the battlefield since 1914, with rifles relegated to secondary importance. Germany had invested heavily in excellent machine guns like the MG-42, capable of firing over 1,200 rounds per minute. These weapons were fearsome, but they created dependencies. Every infantry squad needed at least one machine gun to be combat effective, and machine guns required ammunition that strained supply lines. American infantry, each man armed with a Garand, could achieve local fire superiority without relying so heavily on crew-served weapons. If a machine gun was knocked out, the squad didn't lose most of its firepower. If ammunition ran low, every soldier used the same caliber, allowing for easy redistribution. The semi-automatic rifle had democratized firepower in a way German tactical thinking hadn't anticipated. The shock of this realization spread through the intelligence section as more analysts reviewed the findings. Hauptmann Werner Müller, who specialized in weapons assessment, verified the firing rate data through practical tests with captured M1 rifles. His report was clinical and devastating. Even in the hands of our test personnel with minimal familiarization, the M1 Garand demonstrates a practical rate of accurate fire, approximately 2. 7 times that of our carabiner, 98k. In trained hands, this disparity would increase further. Müller's testing revealed another critical advantage. The M1's semi-automatic operation reduced fatigue during prolonged firefights. Soldiers firing bolt-action rifles experienced significant muscle strain from repeatedly working the bolt, affecting accuracy as engagements continued. Garand users maintained more consistent accuracy throughout extended combat, creating another multiplicative advantage beyond raw rate of fire. German gunsmiths, who examined captured M1s, noted with professional admiration how the design balanced competing priorities. The rifle was neither the most accurate, nor the most durable, nor the simplest design available, but it struck an optimal balance of all these qualities for mass infantry combat. As one master armourer from Mauser wrote, "The Garand is not a finely crafted instrument like our Kar98k, but it is perhaps more perfectly suited to its purpose. It sacrifices the final measure of precision for traits more valuable in the hands of ordinary soldiers." Colonel Eckhard von Manstein, nephew of the famous Field Marshal, compiled these assessments into a comprehensive analysis for the Wehrmacht High Command in September 1944. His report was clinical, mathematical, undeniable in its logic. It compared the practical combat effectiveness of infantry squads equipped with different weapons, calculating effective firepower under various tactical scenarios. The report went beyond simply presenting technical data. Von Manstein included detailed projections of what these firepower disparities meant for tactical operations over the next 6 to 12 months. He calculated that German defensive positions now required nearly 3 times the manpower to generate equivalent firepower to attacking American formations. Static defense lines that might have held against similarly sized forces with bolt-action rifles were now mathematically untenable without massive reinforcement. Even elite German units with the highest training standards could not overcome the raw physics of the situation. The most skilled bolt-action rifleman still needed to manually cycle his weapon between each shot. The most basic American draftee with minimal training could pull the trigger as fast as he could acquire targets. No amount of experience, courage, or tactical skill could close this fundamental capability gap. The report included projections for 1945 and beyond. If current trends continued, by early 1945, American forces would have completely mastered the tactical applications of their superior individual weapons, compounding the already significant advantage. Infantry units that had entered combat in mid-1944 as rookies would now have months of combat experience while still retaining their fundamental firepower superiority. German forces, no matter how well-trained or tactically proficient, would face opponents who combined experience with equipment advantages. Even if German soldiers maintained their tactical superiority, even if they executed perfect defensive operations, the cumulative firepower disparity would eventually make most positions untenable. Available manpower was finite, defensive positions were limited, the trajectory pointed inexorably toward defeat. The report concluded with mathematical certainty that standard German infantry formations could not succeed in prolonged engagements with American forces of equivalent size given the firepower disparity. This was not defeatism or political opinion. It was objective analysis based on verified data. The conclusion was a professional assessment that should have informed tactical doctrine and strategic decision-making. Major Steiner and Captain Mertz expected the High Command to use this information to develop realistic operational adjustments. Perhaps units could be reorganized to increase automatic weapons allocation. Perhaps defensive doctrines could be revised to account for the new firepower realities. Perhaps production priorities could shift toward more semi-automatic rifles like the Gewehr 43, even at the expense of other weapons programs. At minimum, realistic understanding of the situation might prevent committing infantry to untenable positions where they would face overwhelming firepower disadvantages. But the response from Berlin defied professional logic. The detailed analysis was dismissed as defeatist and failing to account for the superior fighting spirit of the German soldier. Field Marshal Model, commanding Army Group B, returned the report with a handwritten note, The German soldier has never depended on technical superiority for victory. Our strength lies in tactical excellence and iron will. This analysis places too much emphasis on equipment and too little on the human element that has always decided battles. This response reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of modern combat. The fighting spirit of infantry became irrelevant when they were pinned down by fire volumes they could not match. Tactical excellence provided no advantage when units couldn't maneuver due to superior enemy firepower. The human element, so central to German military thinking, was being systematically eliminated by industrial-age weapons before it could influence the battlefield. The dismissal of these findings wasn't just misguided optimism. It represented a dangerous detachment from battlefield reality that was costing thousands of lives. German infantry units continued to be deployed according to doctrines developed for different weapons balances, resulting in catastrophic casualty rates when they encountered American forces. The problem extended beyond field commanders to the highest levels of German leadership. When Mertz's findings were summarized for Hitler during a situation briefing in October 1944, the Führer exploded in one of his characteristic rages. According to General Jodel's aide, who was present, Hitler declared, "This is exactly the kind of materialistic thinking that shows the corruption of our officer corps. The Americans are shopkeepers, not warriors. Their fancy rifles will mean nothing when faced with German determination." Hitler then launched into a lengthy monologue about how American soldiers were racially mixed, poorly motivated, and incapable of the fighting spirit that German troops possessed. He cited examples of German victories against materially superior Soviet forces as proof that will and racial quality trumped equipment advantages. This ideological rejection of objective analysis reflected the increasing divorce from reality that characterized the Nazi leadership as the war situation deteriorated. Rather than adjusting to battlefield conditions, they retreated into fantasies of inherent German superiority that no amount of evidence could penetrate. Meanwhile, frontline commanders who actually faced American infantry developed their own unofficial adaptations. Veterans learned to avoid direct firefights with American infantry, relying instead on ambushes, sniping, and hit-and-run tactics that minimized exposure to superior firepower. Unit leaders quietly increased the allocation of automatic weapons, sometimes stripping rear-area units of their MG-42s to ensure every frontline squad had multiple machine guns. These pragmatic adaptations helped reduce casualties, but they couldn't change the fundamental equation. The standard German infantry rifle simply could not generate comparable firepower to its American counterpart, and by 1944, there was no industrial capacity to replace the millions of Kar98ks with more modern weapons. The Gewehr 43 semi-automatic rifle represented Germany's belated recognition of the need for increased infantry firepower, but production totaled only about 402,000 units, compared to over 4 million M1 Garands produced by the Americans. Where every American infantryman carried a semi-automatic rifle, perhaps one German soldier in 20 received a G43. The disparity was too great to overcome through limited production of advanced weapons. The Sturmgewehr 44, perhaps the most innovative infantry weapon of the war, offered even greater firepower with its selective fire capability and intermediate cartridge. But with approximately 425,000 produced, it equipped only elite units and special formations. The vast majority of German infantry still carried the same Kar98k their fathers had used in World War I. This wasn't due to German technical inferiority or lack of innovation. German weapons designers had created superb infantry weapons. The issue was industrial capacity, production philosophy, and strategic priorities. Germany had started the war with a bolt-action rifle and lacked the industrial flexibility to completely retool for modern weapons while fighting on multiple fronts. Sergeant Karl Weiss, a squad leader in the 352nd Infantry Division who had fought from Normandy through the Ardennes, captured this reality in a letter home found by American forces after his death during the Battle of the Bulge. "We are fighting ghosts. The Americans appear, fire 20 or 30 shots in seconds, and disappear before we can properly aim our rifles. Our machine guns are excellent, but they can't be everywhere. Every American is a machine gunner. Their ordinary riflemen put out more fire than our entire squad. My men are brave, but courage means nothing when you're pinned down by fire from weapons that never seem to stop shooting. How can you advance against an enemy who can fire 5 times while you work your bolt once? It's not a question of will or bravery anymore. This frontline perspective reflected the tactical reality that intelligence analysts had documented mathematically. The firepower disparity had fundamentally changed infantry combat in ways that traditional German tactical excellence could not overcome. The bolt-action rifle, backbone of infantry forces since the 1892, had been rendered obsolete by American industrial capacity and weapons design. Captain Mertz continued gathering data throughout the autumn of 1944, documenting the impact of the firepower disparity with clinical precision. He collected after-action reports, medical statistics, ammunition expenditure figures, and prisoner interrogations, all confirming the same basic pattern. American infantry consistently generated 3 times the rifle fire of equivalent German units, creating cascading tactical advantages that accumulated into strategic significance. The prisoner interrogations proved particularly revealing. German soldiers captured during the Hürtgen Forest fighting and Ardennes offensive consistently described the psychological impact of American rifle fire. As one Feldwebel from the 12th Volksgrenadier Division stated, "The Americans never stop shooting. With our rifles, you fire, work the bolt, aim, fire again. You can count the shots. With the Americans, it's just continuous fire. You can't lift your head without 20 bullets coming at you instantly. It breaks the nerve of even veteran soldiers eventually." Medical reports confirmed this psychological impact translated to physical casualties. German infantry suffered head and upper torso wounds at much higher rates when facing American units than when facing British forces still using bolt-action Lee-Enfield rifles. The differential was directly attributable to suppression effectiveness. American riflemen could maintain such consistent fire that German soldiers had less opportunity to use cover effectively. Ammunition expenditure statistics told the same story from a logistics perspective. American infantry units consumed rifle ammunition at 3 times the rate of comparable German formations, yet achieved greater effect with this higher consumption. An American infantry company might fire 15,000 rounds of .30-06 ammunition during a day of moderate combat. A German company would struggle to fire 5,000 rounds from their Kar98ks in similar circumstances, not due to supply limitations but because of the physical constraints of bolt-action operation. Perhaps most telling were the Paulkas Reivers Kar, tactical adaptation reports from experienced German officers. Wehrmacht doctrine had always emphasized maneuver, with fire used to enable movement. This doctrine became increasingly untenable against American units, whose rifle fire alone could fix German forces in place without requiring machine gun support. German infantry found themselves pinned down by ordinary American riflemen, unable to maneuver even when executing textbook tactics. Colonel von Manstein compiled these findings into a revised analysis in November 1944, this time focusing less on the technical aspects and more on the operational implications. His report documented how the firepower disparity was forcing fundamental changes in German defensive tactics, with increased reliance on prepared positions, interlocking fields of fire, and defense in depth, all requiring more manpower than Germany could sustainably deploy. "The practical effect," he wrote, "is that our infantry can no longer confidently engage American forces of equal size. The minimum ratio for a successful defense against American infantry is now approximately 1:5, 1 inch favor of our forces, assuming comparable terrain and support. For offensive operations, we require at minimum a 2-to-1 advantage to overcome their firepower superiority. These ratios assume our forces have adequate machine gun support and experienced leadership. With the current state of replacement training and equipment shortages, even these ratios may prove insufficient." This analysis was quietly circulated among divisional and corps staff officers, who generally recognized its accuracy based on their own observations. While officially maintaining the position that German tactical superiority could overcome material disadvantages, many commanders adjusted their operational planning to reflect the new reality. Units were consolidated to ensure adequate density for defense. automatic weapons were prioritized for forward positions, and rifles were increasingly seen as the weapons of last resort rather than primary arms. Lieutenant General Siegfried Westphal, Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt, acknowledged the firepower disparity in his December 1944 assessment. We must recognize that American infantry capabilities have been consistently underestimated. Their basic rifleman now represents a significantly greater combat threat than anticipated in our pre-invasion planning. Defensive deployments must be adjusted accordingly, with particular attention to automatic weapons distribution and ammunition supply. This belated recognition came too late to influence strategic planning. The Ardennes offensive, launched on the 16th of December 1944, proceeded according to plans that still fundamentally underestimated American infantry capabilities. German forces achieved tactical surprise and initial success, but as American forces recovered and organized effective resistance, the firepower disparity reasserted itself with devastating consequences for attacking German infantry. Prisoner interrogations following the Ardennes fighting revealed the practical impact at the squad level. A captured company commander from the 12th SS Panzer Division described an engagement near Elsenborn Ridge. "We attacked at dawn with a full company against what appeared to be a reinforced American platoon. Initial artillery support was effective, but as soon as we maneuvered into assault positions, we encountered rifle fire of such volume that it seemed impossible from their apparent numbers. 3 of my platoons were pinned down simultaneously, unable to advance despite supporting fire from our machine guns. What should have been a straightforward overwhelming of an outnumbered enemy became a catastrophic failure due solely to the volume of accurate fire their riflemen produced." This account matched dozens of similar reports from different sectors of the front, all describing the same fundamental dynamic. German infantry, even when holding numerical superiority and executing proper tactics, found themselves suppressed by the sheer volume of American rifle fire. The M1 Garand had effectively democratized firepower in a way that rendered traditional infantry combat calculations obsolete. By January 1945, the cumulative impact of this firepower disparity had become one of the defining features of the Western Front. German defensive lines required density that stretched available manpower to breaking points. Offensive operations became increasingly untenable as casualties among infantry mounted. The Volksgrenadier divisions, formed as emergency replacements with limited training, proved particularly vulnerable to American firepower, lacking the tactical experience to mitigate the equipment disadvantage. Major Steiner, reviewing casualty statistics for January 1945, noted the grim mathematics with professional detachment. German infantry units facing American forces suffered approximately 28% higher casualty rates than those facing British or Canadian units equipped with bolt-action rifles. The difference was entirely attributable to small arms fire effectiveness, as artillery and air support were comparable across Allied forces. The mounting evidence that their basic infantry weapon was fundamentally outclassed by its American counterpart created a crisis within the German officer corps. Captain Mertz found himself increasingly isolated as his analysis became more widely known. Some officers respected his professional rigor, while privately acknowledging the accuracy of his conclusions. Others viewed his work as defeatist, undermining morale and fighting spirit. By February 1945, the practical effects of the M1 Garand's superiority had become impossible to deny on the battlefield, even as German leadership continued to reject the strategic implications. In what became known as the Rifles Conference, held at OKW headquarters outside Berlin on February 12, 1945, senior officers gathered to discuss the deteriorating infantry situation. General Heinz Guderian, Chief of the General Staff, had requested presentations on weapons effectiveness to address the catastrophic casualty rates on both fronts. Captain Mertz was unexpectedly called to present his findings. The room fell silent as the young intelligence officer methodically laid out the evidence. Using comparative charts, combat statistics, and testimony from field commanders, he demonstrated how a technological disparity that seemed modest on paper had transformed the nature of infantry combat. His presentation culminated in a stark conclusion. In practical terms, An American infantry company of 200 men generates the rifle firepower equivalent of a German battalion of 800 men. This disparity cannot be overcome through tactics or motivation alone. Field Marshal Keitel interrupted, his face flushed with anger. This is precisely the kind of defeatist analysis that undermines our war effort. The German soldier has never depended on technical advantages for victory. Our strength lies in character, in will, in tactical excellence. Mertz stood his ground. Herr Field Marshal, this is not about character or will. It is simple physics and mechanics. A semi-automatic rifle fires faster than a bolt-action rifle. No amount of courage can change this fundamental reality. The room erupted in heated discussion. Some officers sided with Keitel, arguing that German tactical superiority had overcome material disadvantages throughout the war. Others, particularly those with recent front-line experience, reluctantly acknowledged the accuracy of Mertz's assessment. Colonel Joachim von Sandrart, who had commanded infantry on the Western Front since Normandy, finally spoke. "Gentlemen, I have witnessed this reality firsthand. My men are as brave and well-trained as any who have ever worn German uniform. But when they face American infantry in open combat, the firepower disparity is overwhelming. We have compensated by increasing machine gun allocations and avoiding direct firefights. But the fundamental problem remains. Our basic rifleman cannot generate comparable fire to his American counterpart." General Guderian, always the pragmatist, asked the question that should have been posed years earlier. What can be done at this stage to address this disparity? Can we accelerate production of the Gewehr 43 or the Sturmgewehr? The armaments representative shook his head. Production capacity for both weapons is already maximized. Raw material shortages and bombing damage to manufacturing facilities make any significant increase impossible. At current rates, we can equip perhaps 5% of our infantry with semi-automatic or automatic weapons by April 1945. The stark reality hung over the room. Germany had created excellent advanced infantry weapons, but lacked the industrial capacity to produce them in quantities that would matter strategically. Meanwhile, America had prioritized a good enough semi-automatic rifle and manufactured millions, transforming the battlefield one infantryman at a time. Guderian dismissed the meeting with uncharacteristic quietness. Adjust tactical doctrines as necessary to minimize exposure to direct infantry engagements with American forces. Prioritize remaining automatic weapons for frontline units. That is all we can do. As the officers filed out, Major Steiner approached Mertz. Your analysis was correct and professionally presented, but you must understand that at this stage of the war, such truths are unwelcome. Mertz nodded. The truth does not cease to exist when ignored, Major. The American rifle advantage was evident since 1942. We simply chose not to see it until it was killing our men by the thousands. Back in their intelligence office, the two officers returned to their ongoing analysis. The human cost of this tactical disparity was mounting daily. Field hospitals reported that infantry units facing American forces suffered approximately 28% higher casualties than those facing British or Canadian units equipped with bolt-action rifles. The difference was entirely attributable to small arms fire effectiveness. More disturbing were the psychological impact reports from medical officers. Combat fatigue and psychiatric casualties occurred at higher rates among units that had faced American infantry repeatedly. The continuous suppressive fire from semi-automatic rifles created psychological pressure that even veteran soldiers found difficult to endure for prolonged periods. The American rifleman doesn't just kill more efficiently, noted Dr. Ernst Kramer, chief psychiatrist for Army Group B. He breaks the will to resist more effectively. The human mind can adapt to periodic intense danger, but the constant threat created by sustained accurate fire exceeds the psychological tolerance of many soldiers, regardless of training or experience. This psychological dimension explained something that had puzzled German commanders: why units often surrendered when their objective situation didn't appear desperate. Troops who had experienced American rifle fire developed what frontline officers called Garand shock, an acute awareness that they were fundamentally outgunned at the individual level. As one company commander from the 26th Volksgrenadier Division explained after surrendering his position in the Hürtgen Forest, "My men were physically capable of continuing resistance. We had ammunition, food, and defensible positions. But after 3 days under continuous American rifle fire, they had reached psychological breaking points. The constant suppression meant they couldn't move, couldn't effectively return fire, couldn't even raise their heads without drawing immediate, accurate shots. Eventually, even brave men conclude that continued resistance is futile." By March 1945, the cumulative effect of this infantry firepower disparity had become a significant factor in the accelerating collapse of German resistance in the West. Veteran units that had fought effectively for years found themselves unable to maintain cohesive defensive positions against American infantry attacks, even when supported by artillery and armor. The fundamental building block of military operations, the infantry rifleman, had been transformed by American industrial policy and weapons design. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, who assumed command of German forces in the West on March 10, 1945, quickly recognized the tactical implications. In his first situation assessment, he wrote, "Our infantry no longer possesses the firepower to maintain static defensive positions against American forces without unsustainable casualty rates. We must transition to mobile defense, trading space for time, and avoiding direct infantry engagements wherever possible." This acknowledgement came far too late to influence the outcome. American forces crossed the Rhine at Remagen on March 7 and rapidly expanded their bridgehead. The semi-automatic rifle that German intelligence had dismissed as impractical for mass deployment was now enabling American infantry to maintain advance rates that German defensive doctrine could not counter. The final irony came in April 1945, as American forces drove into central Germany. Prisoners captured during this period included teenage Hitler Youth and elderly Volkssturm militia, many equipped with bolt-action rifles manufactured before World War I. These last-ditch defenders faced American infantry divisions, where every rifleman carried a weapon that rendered their own obsolete by every practical measure. In one of his final intelligence assessments dated April 15, 1945, Captain Mertz wrote, "The disparity in infantry small arms represents in microcosm the broader strategic failure of German military planning. We created excellent weapons but produced them in insufficient quantities. We developed sophisticated tactical doctrines that our frontline units cannot execute due to equipment limitations. We trained our soldiers to standards of excellence, but armed them with weapons that cannot generate competitive firepower on the modern battlefield." Major Steiner added a handwritten note to this assessment. The American approach to warfare values practical effectiveness over theoretical perfection. Their rifle is not the most accurate, the most durable, or the most elegant, but it is good enough for its purpose and available in quantities that transform the battlefield. This philosophy extends beyond small arms to their entire approach to industrial warfare. As American forces approached Berlin, the two intelligence officers destroyed their files and prepared to surrender. Their final conversation, reconstructed from Steiner's post-war memoirs, captured the essence of their professional analysis. "What will history make of our failure to adapt to the semi-automatic rifle?" Mertz asked as they burned documents in the courtyard of their headquarters. Steiner considered the question. "It will be seen as part of a larger failure to understand industrial warfare. We approached this conflict as if it were still 1918, where tactical excellence and fighting spirit could overcome material disadvantages. The Americans approached it as an industrial engineer might, identifying the critical components, optimizing for mass production, and transforming warfare through sheer scale. The M1 Garand was not a technological marvel," Mertz noted. "Any competent arms designer in Germany could have created something similar or better." "But that was never the point," Steiner replied. "The American achievement wasn't designing the weapon, it was manufacturing millions of them to a consistent standard of quality and reliability. They democratized firepower while we kept it centralized. Every American rifleman became the equivalent of 3 of ours. The mathematics of that disparity, multiplied across millions of infantrymen, made the outcome inevitable." As the files burned, reducing years of analysis to ash, Mertz reflected on the broader implications. The tragedy is not that we lost. The tragedy is that the outcome was predictable and documented years ago. We analyzed the American rifle's capabilities accurately. We calculated its practical effects correctly. We projected the tactical implications with professional precision, and then we ignored our own analysis because it contradicted our preconceptions about warfare. The story of German intelligence assessment of the M1 Garand reveals profound truths about modern warfare that transcend the specific historical context. Technical advantages at the individual soldier level can create cascading effects that transform the battlefield. Industrial capacity often matters more than technical sophistication. Mass production of good enough weapons can overcome theoretical advantages of superior designs that cannot be manufactured in sufficient quantities. The German intelligence services performed their analytical duties with professional competence. They gathered information, assessed its reliability, calculated implications, and presented conclusions based on evidence rather than ideology. Their work represented what military intelligence should do: provide accurate assessment of enemy capabilities to enable informed decision-making. That their conclusions were systematically ignored and rejected represents failure not of intelligence, but of leadership, unwilling to accept unpleasant truths. The mathematical proof of American infantry superiority existed in comparative fire rate studies, showing 3-to-1 advantages in practical shooting conditions. It existed in casualty statistics showing higher German losses from small arms fire on the Western Front. It existed in ammunition expenditure reports showing American units consuming rifle cartridges at rates German formations could not match. The proof was comprehensive, verified from multiple sources, mathematically undeniable, and systematically ignored by those with power to adjust doctrine and strategy accordingly. Looking back from our perspective decades later, the German intelligence assessments of 1944 and 1945 appear both prescient and tragically futile. The analysts were correct in every major conclusion. The M1 Garand created a fundamental firepower disparity at the squad level that could not be overcome through tactics or training. This disparity had cascading effects on every aspect of infantry combat. But this knowledge changed nothing, because leadership chose to believe in fighting spirit, tactical excellence, and historical tradition, rather than objective reality. The war continued until Germany's complete military collapse, until cities were ruins, until millions more were dead, until the evidence of defeat was written not in intelligence reports, but in occupied territory and unconditional surrender. The lesson transcends World War II, and remains relevant for understanding modern conflict. Accurate intelligence is worthless if leadership refuses to accept unwelcome conclusions. Systematic analysis means nothing if decisions are based on ideology rather than evidence. Professional competence becomes irrelevant when confronted with willful blindness. German intelligence accurately assessed the M1 Garand's capabilities and the transformation of infantry combat it represented. German leadership chose fantasy over reality, and the result was catastrophe that might have been mitigated through earlier acceptance of tactical truth. In the end, German analysts studied captured American training manuals and understood what they revealed about infantry combat, not through any single revelation, but through accumulation of undeniable evidence over months. Each captured document added data points. Each prisoner interrogation provided validation. Each combat report corroborated previous intelligence. The picture that emerged was complete, verified, mathematically certain. American riflemen generated 3 times the firepower of their German counterparts, and that disparity was killing German soldiers at rates that no tactical doctrine could overcome. The analysts knew this, documented it meticulously, and presented it clearly to leadership. Their tragedy was not analytical failure, but the irrelevance of accurate intelligence when leadership refuses to accept reality. The captured training manuals told a story of tactical transformation written in numbers that could not be argued with or dismissed, except through willful blindness. They showed American infantry capabilities that seemed impossible, according to German experience, but were verified through multiple independent sources. They revealed an enemy with such overwhelming individual firepower that German hopes of tactical parity were fantasies disconnected from battlefield reality. The only question remaining by late 1944 was how long Germany would deny what the numbers made clear. How many more would die before empirical evidence replaced ideological conviction as the basis for tactical decisions? That question was answered on May 8, 1945, when Germany surrendered unconditionally, defeated not primarily by strategic bombing or massive offensives, but by the accumulated effect of millions of individual combat engagements, where American riflemen consistently generated more firepower than their German counterparts. The intelligence analysts who first studied those captured training manuals in mid-1944 had understood this truth months earlier. They had tried to warn their leadership, they had presented the evidence, they had shown the mathematics. Their warnings were ignored, and thousands paid the price for that willful blindness. The captured American training manuals documented not just firing rates and maintenance procedures, but the transformation of infantry combat through democratized firepower. The numbers told a truth that German leadership could not accept. In modern warfare, industrial policy matters more than martial tradition. Production capacity determines outcomes more than tactical doctrine, and mathematics always wins in the end. This historical episode offers a powerful reminder for military planners and national security policymakers. Sometimes the most consequential advantages don't come from wonder weapons or revolutionary technologies, but from seemingly modest improvements applied at scale. The M1 Garand wasn't a technological marvel. It was simply a good, reliable semi-automatic rifle produced in quantities that transformed the battlefield, one infantryman at a time. The American achievement wasn't creating the best possible infantry rifle. It was creating one good enough to outperform its contemporaries while remaining simple enough to mass-produce and reliable enough for front-line service. This philosophy of practical effectiveness over theoretical perfection characterized the entire American approach to industrial warfare. As we face modern security challenges and evaluate emerging military technologies, we would do well to remember the lesson of the Garand. The most effective military innovations aren't always the most sophisticated or impressive. They're the ones that can be produced at scale, deployed widely, and operated effectively under actual combat conditions. The true revolution in military affairs often happens not with experimental prototypes or limited production specialty weapons, but when good enough technology transforms ordinary soldiers into extraordinarily effective fighting forces. The M1 Garand did exactly that, creating an American infantry advantage that German intelligence recognized too late and German leadership never fully accepted until the mathematical reality of defeat made further denial impossible. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.